You're listening to the Exploring Fitness Podcast, Episode 9. In this week's episode, Dr. Dan talks with an academic researcher and powerlifter about strength programming so that you can apply up-to-date principles into your own strength routine. In 3, 2, 1, go. I'm Dan Dalator. In over 10 years of experience as a clinician and a coach, I've worked with hundreds of athletes to help them improve their health, wellness, and fitness, but still feel that there is so much more for all of us to learn. This is a podcast dedicated to furthering our understanding of health, wellness, fitness, and how to apply these concepts into our daily lives to create true and lasting changes in your fitness and health. This is the Exploring Fitness Podcast. In our first episode, we discussed the supporting models of CrossFit's methodology. One of those models was the 10 general physical skills. 2 of those 10 skills include strength and power. Our guest this week exemplifies those 2 physical skills. He has an extensive history of utilizing strength programming in the world of competitive powerlifting. For those who might not be familiar, powerlifting includes the 3 lifts of back squat, bench press, and deadlift, with the goal of lifting as much weight as humanly possible. Not only does he use his personal experience, but also the most up-to-date literature, even some of his own scholarly research, to guide his strength programs. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back for another episode. For this episode, we have a special guest. This is someone that I first met over 10 years ago now while I was going through PT school. He is a powerlifter, a doctoral level PT faculty, and a researcher. His achievements in powerlifting include personal bests of an 825-pound back squat, 500-pound bench press, 710-pound deadlift, and a 2,010-pound total in the 275-pound weight class. He is the assistant program director at the University of New England's Doctor of Physical Therapy program, where he also conducts research on his personal interests of resistance training and sport biomechanics. He has been the author on numerous peer-reviewed research articles. He has his Bachelor's of Science in Exercise Science, Master's in Biomechanics, and is currently working on finishing up his PhD. Mike Lawrence, welcome to the Exploring Fitness Podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Did I miss anything?
Hey, that sounds like enough.
Nothing else you want to tell the listeners about yourself?
I kind of forgot that I met you 10 years ago when you were still going through, but yeah, right? That's how you said that. Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
I've been here that long.
It's a little close to home, huh?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. So the first question I ask all of my guests, what is fitness to you?
Fitness. So I guess I would say it's the ability to basically perform the daily tasks at a high level and adapt to changes in your environment. So the higher your level of fitness, the better you can adapt to changes. I guess I'm thinking survival fitness almost there, going back to the Darwinian concepts.
I love that. Because ultimately it's all about survival, right?
Yeah, pretty much, especially in powerlifting and academia. Yeah, that's what it feels like.
But yeah, the ability to adapt to our environment and perform daily tasks at a high level, that's ultimately whenever people become not able to do that is whenever we end up in nursing homes and experience debility, right?
Yeah.
So I think that
fat powerlifter and can't walk up the stairs without getting out of breath, you know.
Right. What's the point?
Just pick up heavy things one time.
Speaking of picking up heavy things, can you kind of
Yeah.
start by telling us about your journey into powerlifting? Like, how did you get started? What drew you into that sport specifically?
So I always, in looking back, I don't think I realized at the time, I did a bunch of different sports in high school. Played football, I wrestled. I was actually a pole vaulter, believe it or not, at one time. I was much smaller in high school.
I would not have guessed pole vault.
Yeah. I did it because I was like, this looks cool. I'm never going to get a chance to do this again unless I do it in high school. So I went to college and, I wasn't good enough in anything to continue on the collegiate level. I went to Ball State University, which is a small D1 school, but still Division I. And literally just walking around, like they had a expo or a career fair one day, and I saw there was like a powerlifting booth, and I was like, I didn't even know you could like lift weights competitively at the time. So I kind of like went over them, and I thought I was strong at the time because I benched like 220 or 240 or something, and I only weighed like 150 pounds. And then I went to one of their like first workout sessions, and I was like, oh, okay, that's not strong at all. I didn't realize the level of strength that people could attain there. And starting off, my first kind of real exposure to powerlifting was the Ball State team, and they were pretty competitive at the collegiate level. The first year I was there, Matt Winning was finishing up his graduate degree, his master's in biomechanics. So he was my first coach, and he really introduced me to a bunch of different training principles I'd never heard of, like the whole West Side conjugate method, which he was following there. And after like, I don't know, 6 or 7 months of powerlifting, and not doing very well, but just really, really loving it and really loving being able to chase numbers and see improvements. I went all in and I like changed my major. People might not know my first, I think it's kind of funny. My original intent going into college was to be an elementary education teacher. So I kind of say sometimes that works because I deal with, grad students.
Yeah. Not that far off.
Really. Yeah. Some things not as far off as you think, So, changed my major, changed my whole outlook, my whole goals in life and really got caught up in powerlifting, competed there throughout my time at Ball State, did my master's there in biomechanics, did my internship with Matt when he was at Westside in Lexington. So I got like all in on like the pro powerlifting scene, which at the time, 2000, I think that's 2008. So it was all like the multiply gear and like, just these giant people walking around. I've never seen like, you go to like a big event like the Arnold or something like that, and you literally stand next to someone who's like 6'8" and 450 pounds. And then I was like, all right, this makes sense why they're strong and I'm not.
Yeah, I think people see these guys on TV, and like it's hard to really rationalize unless you're standing next to them just how massive some of these dudes are.
Yeah, and I always describe myself as a small 275. Like legitimately, I was small for that weight class because I didn't cut down and to get to 275. I didn't want to cut weights. I weighed in like 272 or 273 most times. And then like there's one guy I competed against. His name escapes me right now, but I was sitting next to him in a warm-up room, and he was, he's telling me about how he was in the sauna the next day, and he looked like a pro-level bodybuilder. He was a bodybuilder first, switched to powerlifting. He's like, yeah, I lost 20 pounds. So I was like, he's walking around almost 300 pounds. I'm barely getting to the 275 mark. And, he thrashed me that day, but it was a good experience for it. So I kind of tried to build it from both ends with the lifting and then also like the education and kind of career. And so I just I really wanted to push that way. And I tell people I've gotten to biomechanics, so I wanted to figure out how to squat more weight. So that's kind of how I got sucked into it.
Did it work?
Yeah, it did. Long-term goal, but yeah, it did.
Awesome. So you got into it while you were in college. Still still participating in powerlifting?
So when you have a kid and start a doctoral program, I kind of backed off from competing. Um, I have a gym at my house, and I'd say a gym. It's a 4-car garage with 2 monoliths, comp benches, comp bars. We have a small team that competes there. And so I'm doing a little more of the coaching aspect now, and I still like go and judge meets and go to meets. I'm going to strongman comp this weekend. We got a buddy who's competing. I have a very hard time personally where if I am not going to be at my peak or going to try to set a PR of like attempting to even start a meet cycle. The last meet I was scheduled to do, COVID hit 4 weeks out. So a bunch of us kind of just, at the time we had to kind of pause the training because we didn't know, the meet got pushed back a month and then pushed back 3 months. And at the time I was like, I'm going to fall apart. Like I can't lift that heavy all the time to prep for a meet and I don't know what's going to happen. So that's why I got more, I was like, I switch gears, go into more of the academia side, go, push the research stuff, get there. Cause I have a big interest in, just the biomechanics and physiology behind it too. It's not just chasing the weights for me.
Yeah. So
long answer. No, not right now.
So you do more of the coaching stuff now. So does that include like programming for the athletes on the team?
Yeah. We've got a pretty, for the small team, when I say team, I mean, the most we ever had at my gym was like 12 people. It's a garage gym, but our garage gyms produce 3 guys that deadlift over 7 and 2 that squat over 8. So like, I think we did pretty well for our small team. I've got some younger lifters right now, so it's, they're more like trying to squat 400 or something. but I mean that's good. It's still It's good to get the new people in. I'm like one of the old guys now, which just blows my mind. But
so you said that you got into biomechanics in order to squat heavier.
Yeah.
So can you kind of like talk about that journey and how like you going through your own personal academics and then into like your career in academia has kind of shifted the way you've approached strength programming over the years?
Yeah, so it's probably a combination of like the experience with lifting over the years and what I've seen there, and definitely the academics, because you can't like all be really good at. To be really good, you can't just do one or the other. You can't be like, as described once, you can't be a bookworm, you can't be a meathead, you gotta be both. Right? That's a Matt Winning phrase there. So what I try to do is, I definitely look at the science, I look at the research that's been done, but of course, like research has to be very kind of like conservative and focused for it to work. And then, that's applied to the masses. That's not necessarily applied to the outliers. And when you get into the higher level of powerlifting, like it or not, those guys are outliers. I mean, I was definitely, if you take a lot of the strength research and you try to apply it to where I was at my peak, I would be an outlier just because of like the training levels. Most of that research is done on like typical undergrad students who may or may not have 5 years of training. So taking that, looking, and also the other thing, my issue with research is it's slow. It takes like 10 years for like something that's researched to really make it out there and make changes in the world. But looking at it the other side from like the experimental stuff that powerlifters were doing. So like Louis Simmons, the bands, the change, the conjugate training, the kind of the Eastern Bloc sort of stuff he did with with the reverse Heidegger idea, the unstable load training stuff, like all the different bars that are now really popular in gyms. Like you see safety squat bars everywhere now. You never saw those, 10, 15 years ago. So what I did, or some of my research is actually focused on like, okay, I know why I use a safety squat bar for my training, but what's it actually do? And what's it do to kind of like most people? Because again, if you look at higher level powerlifters versus like your average college age students, you're going to have a little bit of a difference. So I have we did a study on like the safety squat bar. That was one of the first ones there. We did one on a belt squat. I've got a series on like unstable load training. And it was really like, are these things that, the powerlifters are doing and using? One, are they effective? We can say they're probably effective just from the training results they get. But like, to me, it's like, well, what's the mechanism? And am I missing something that I could pick up, doing some motion analysis, that we could use this for different applications. So that's, I try to like take the gym stuff and put it in the lab.
Yeah. Is there some way that we can make this even more effective?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Or what's the most effective way to do it? Do you hang kettlebells? Do you hang plates? Does it matter? It actually apparently does matter. If with kettlebells, you get more instability on the unstable stuff, but I like to quantify things. So I was really quantifying that stuff in the lab.
Awesome. So you've mentioned conjugate training multiple times now. Can you kind of go into like some of the key principles behind like what makes an effective strength program?
Yeah, well, first one, it's kind of weird to say it because I think conjugate for a lot of people means a lot of change, a lot of doing different things. Consistency is like my number one thing. Like you've got to show up 4 to 5 to 6 days a week at the gym to do something, even if it's not like a main workout, doing a mini workout or recovery workouts. So consistencies over a long period of time. And I try to take the long view, even with my younger lifters. Like we're looking 6 months to a year. I don't care what makes you strong in 2 weeks. That doesn't matter to me unless there's a meet in 2 weeks. Doing that, using good technique, learning good technique for that, because to me, especially with powerlifting, you're looking at how do I move the most amount of weights? You do that by obviously having a really effective technique that allows you to lift the most amount of weights, but also having a good enough technique that you don't get injured. Like if you think, if someone's injured, if they hurt themselves every 2 or 3 months, they're out for 2 or 3 weeks each time. That adds up to a lot of time after 5, 6, 7 years or so. So I really look at it as like how, especially from the biomechanical perspective, it's like how can we adapt someone's lifting technique to make sure they can keep that consistency and at a high level, if at all possible. I also really like variation. I just despise linear periodization. It to me is just the most boring thing in the world. I say that after I've done blocks of it. I do put in blocks of it sometimes. It is effective. But I dread knowing exactly what I'm going to do every time I walk into the gym, because I like to push, and I like to push hard, whether that's the weight, the reps, the time under tension. And that's where I kind of tap into the variation that's kind of well known to conjugates. So the traditional conjugate, you have a max effort day where you cycle different maximum effort exercises, and then you have a speed day. And again, you're almost always using a variation of a competition lift on either one of those days. So I've kind of taken that model and kind of molded it a little bit to, something I think works a little bit better for like the raw training, the younger lifters, the stuff that works for myself. But I would still say the big things are the consistency, the load, going in with the intention to move something heavy, even if it feels like, always move something like it's heavy, always try to accelerate the bar as fast as possible. And then having good technique, because it all goes back to that consistency. Whoever lifts the heaviest weights the longest, that's the one person who's going to be the strongest one.
As boring as it might be, so I've heard before that linear might be more effective and appropriate for like a novice weightlifter where it might not be as effective for somebody who's well trained, and that's when like the conjugate would be more appropriate? Do you think there's truth to that, or?
So the research, I don't think backs that. Actually, I think if you apply it correctly, and there's always that caveat of apply correctly, you can have equal gains from a novice, because you think the novice is going to get better no matter what they do. Like new people, I swear they walk in the door and their squat goes up 10, 15 pounds. Like you just make little tweaks with them, and they get better at learning the exercises, the movement patterns. So I think the research kind of states that, like, as long as you're consistent, the method does not matter as much for those initial strength gains. I would come back to say most training studies, like 12 weeks long, 16 weeks long. What would be really cool is to have a training study that was 5 years long, and then see what's more effective. Training one person one way, another person the other way. To me, it's also about retention on people. Like if someone's coming in, they have to squat 3 sets of 10 every single day. Is that going to be something that people want to do? Is that going to be something that makes it fun? Or if you come in someday and you're like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I know I'm just going to be really hard and really challenging, or I'm going to try to beat someone on this exercise because they're a little bit better at me, with the safety bar than they are the straight bar or something like that. I think if it's done correctly, you can have just as good a gains. One of my biggest issue with the linear periodization is like the love for percentages on there. And percentages are so variable. 50% on a leg press for a trained individual, they might get 10 reps. For untrained individuals, they're getting 20 or 30 reps. So to me, you got to look at the effort for that.
Yeah, I think that's where I've seen a lot of things changing to more of rating of perceived exertion, or reps in reserve. So doing a lift until you feel like you can only do 2 more reps and then stop at that point.
Yeah, I definitely prefer something like that too, because it takes into account how you're feeling that day. The most I can get from you in any given day is you're 100% for that day. And what if you're only coming in at 90 or 95%? It's well, Dan, you didn't hit your percentages today. So what do we do? Do we throw our linear program out? Do we redo the workout next week? It throws you off. And now you're sitting there being like, well, I failed. Where if we take it from a standpoint of, I want you to work really hard with really good technique. And, the weight's going to be what the weight's going to be today. I'm looking at the effort. And knowing, and then kind of knowing yourself and your lifters well enough to know about where they should be on any given exercise, or any sort of movement. My problem with RPE for myself, I have a really hard time judging, especially right now. I'm like, well, that was really hard. And then I watched the video. I'm like, that wasn't hard at all. That moved really fast. It just felt awful because I'm sore or my hip hurt, things like that. So instead of an RPE, I usually, just for myself, I watch a video and then judge it like I'm judging someone else.
Yeah. But I think that kind of goes the same way. On any given day, you're going to feel a little bit different. So your rating might feel different, even though it looks otherwise on video.
Yeah. But I mean, who hasn't gotten underweight one day to squat and you're like, I benched this the other day and today it feels like I can barely squat it.
Yeah, for sure. We've mentioned periodization a couple of times already. Can you kind of just break that down a little bit for a listener who might not necessarily know what that is?
Yeah, so periodization to me is just your organization of your training, usually leading up to a competition of some sort. So for powerlifting, most people I train do 2, maybe 3 meets a year. Top level guys might do even less. They might do 1 meet a year, maybe 1 meet to kind of qualify, and then their national or their world meet there. It's really just the organization of how you get to that peaking or to be performing your best, because you can't be your strongest every single day you walk in. And most of the time that is playing with like your volume or your intensity. So how much weight you have in the bar versus like how many reps you have. And it's funny, even in, like, doesn't seem to matter like how you organize it, linear, non-linear, like conjugate, anything, it always follows the same thing. It's like you start with more volume, less intensity, and then you shift. Your overall shift is towards heavier weights for less reps. And it's almost like as long as you keep that premise there, that's like 70-80% of programming is done right there. The difference with your standard linear is we have a hypertrophy phase, and then we have a strength phase, and then we have a power phase. And even before I really understood like non-linear training, I was always like, okay, but if you built your muscle, and then when you're in your power phase, 10 weeks later, what is that muscle going to stay? Because what's stimulating it to stay there? Like I understand you're trying to train for power, but you've lost all those reps. So with my non-linear stuff, what I do is I mix in things. So when I'm in a more volume intensity phase, every now and then, like once a month, we'll do a max effort lift. It might be a max double or triple, but it kind of almost does this cool like reset too, where if you're doing a lot of volume and then all of a sudden like 70% feels heavy to you. Well, if you go in for a day and you're working at 90, 95, maybe close to 100%, you come back that next week, you're like, wow, this 70% does not feel that heavy anymore, And then doing just kind of, so it's a more gradual phasing of it, it's more mixing of it throughout to kind of keep you not, so you don't lose those components over time.
And then how do you approach like as you get closer to meets?
Yeah, so as you get closer to meets, like I said, that intensity really ramps up and the volume drops down. So it really ends up being almost like, for me, a traditional conjugate training that lasts 4 weeks, that my peaking cycle, where I have a day where we're working very near maximal weights. And I like to use bands and chains in my lifting. And, it's been really successful with the progressing it, but it's also always given me a very consistent mark. So I would do something like on the squat, I would do, 3 doubles with 100 pounds of band tension. And then I do 3 doubles of a deadlift with, 70, 80 pounds of band tension. I actually ordered chain on that one. And then the bench, we do something similar, about 70 pounds of band tension, 3 really heavy doubles. And that's the bulk of your training for that. You do a little bit of accessories, but that's more to just like almost make you feel better after that and make sure you don't, just hit the main lift and walk out the door. It's almost geared more towards recovery. And then, you get closer and move to a maximum with those same sorts of setups. So we'd overload with the band tension at the top, but hit a max single on that. And same with the deadlifts, the same with the squat. So it really, like, we drive that intensity, that load as high as we possibly can with the maximal weights, but also with that band overload. So you're unracking, you're essentially your maximum. You're unracking your max, and you're feeling what that max is like for a good portion of the lift, but you're unloaded just enough at the bottom that you can complete that lift. And it really ended up pretty well. Is like we could take whatever my bar weight was plus 100 pounds, and that we knew that was really close to what I'd squat to meet. That was my third attempt essentially. And we also knew that if the bar weight and then you take the bands off, that I could squat that for an opener pretty easily, because I did it, 2 weeks before without the bands. So it's for me that the peaking is really driving the intensity, dropping the volume to almost negligible amounts, but still keeping in a little bit of accessory work, kind of to act as like active recovery. Or very powerlifting specific, it's something we do like twice a year. So you're not going to do that for basketball or football or something like that. You would never get out of it. But if you've got like one or two really heavy things, really hard things you're doing a year, it's like a 12-week block kind of culminating in that super high intensity period.
Cool. So for someone who might have never used bands or chains before, like the basic idea is that whenever the bar is close to the ground, there's less resistance because the band's not pulling as much and there's more chain laying on the ground. As that bar moves away from the ground, or you're lifting that bar against gravity, the band is also gaining in tension, or there's more links of that chain coming off of the ground. So essentially, the more you move that bar, the heavier the bar is getting.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty wild concept. And if you've never done it before and then try it one time, like it can get very humbling very quickly.
Yeah, I would say start with the chains first, because another big aspect with the bands is the bands pull faster than gravity. Like the tension on that band, it will snap the bar down. And you can learn how to use that for to learn how to rebound or to learn how to be more explosive. But if you don't know how to use that at first, it can be a little unnerving.
It can crumble you.
Yeah, it can crumble you, and the bands pull a different way than the barbell. Like the bar pulls towards the floor, the bands pull towards their anchor point. So if your anchor point's not set up, it should be just in front of your ankle, really, for the squat. If it's not set up just right, you might go forward or backward really quick. Chains are a little more forgiving for that. Yeah. But yeah, same idea on both of them, and it just looks cool to have hundreds of pounds of chain on the bar. So
good to know. What are some of the most common mistakes that you see athletes make whenever they're getting into powerlifting or doing their own strength programming?
One is expecting, and new people, like they have these huge gains usually first, right? But it's like people tend to almost go in there expecting that they're going to put 100 pounds on their bench in 6 weeks, especially if they have bad technique. I will prioritize technique. I think people should prioritize their technique over the weight when they start. The weight will come, right? And I'm not saying you have to have picture perfect technique on everything, but pick like 2 or 3 things on each lift and just try to improve them. Try to improve if you try to improve the worst 1 or 2 things about your lift and just keep progressing that's how you get better. So I see people coming in and trying to lift max weights all the time. They try to max out on every set, not thinking about what they've got to do in 3 days. They got to come back and lift hard again. And especially for a lot of the new people, they'll come in and say, "Oh, I eat a lot." And like, you don't eat a lot. You don't know what a lot of food is like. Like, I do a lot of coaching on, how much someone should eat, how much protein they should eat. And it comes to like both ends. People will come in under eating, or they'll come in and think they're being super active all the time. Like we got to find the balance with where that is. So people's expectations is sometimes they'll just, they might look at me or one of the other more senior lifters like, "Oh, I'll get there in like a year." I'm like, man, it took me almost 20 years to get to my strong. It took me probably 15 years to get to my strongest point. And that's 15 years of lifting, but also 15 years of eating and doing after recovery and like doing all that outside work outside the gym too to support that. So those are my 2 biggest things I commonly get on people for.
Yeah. And on the nutritional side, not just appropriate quantities, but also quality. Yeah. Quality and the amounts of each of the macros that are appropriate for what you're doing.
We are beyond the when I got into powerlifting, the early mid 2000s, it was all about be as big as you can. It was almost like a competition to see how big people could get, and there are people who would eat stacks of Oreos as, and that was part of their training, or something. Or there's one point I went to a gym around this area And I saw a guy there, and he had a stack of little W's on the lat pull down. He's deadlifting. I was like, what are you doing? And he goes like, I'm eating those for energy. I was like, what? Like, he's doing speed deadlifts. He'd do one deadlift and then eat a little Debbie cake, and then do another deadlift. And I was like, dude, that's not how that works. These guys got sugar in it. I'm like, no, God. But a lot of people have figured out, and like if you look over like the past probably 20 years, people have gotten really, really strong. A lot of that I think is like CrossFit's influence. People are much more fit in that community. People learning the lifts earlier, but they're also learning how to nutrition, how to eat. So now it's not, people are not like pushing their body weight as high as they can. It's like people might be pushing their body weight up, but they're lean. Like some of the top powerlifters look like bodybuilders. I mean, and I'm not joking, like they could step on a stage. They are that lean. They're walking around at, sub 10%, but their diet is just spot on with that. I mean, I was talking to a guy, and he's a smaller guy, and he out squatted me. And I was like, man, that's amazing. He's like 220 pounds or something. He squatted like 835. And I'd known him a little bit, so I was talking to him. He goes, yeah. He's like, it's really hard to eat as much as I need to now. So I started doing chicken shakes. because my jaw was getting too sore.
Literally putting chicken in a blender.
Yeah, you put chicken in a blender, and that's a thing that and actually we've all probably tried something like that once or twice. Chicken or tuna or whatever. It doesn't taste as fine. It's the texture that's terrible. But that was the thing a top lifter did years, 10 years ago or something like that, because he couldn't eat at his job. So he made chicken shakes. And then that was another thing, like people who are at that level and eating that much protein, it's not uncommon. Like your jaw gets sore because you're eating every 2 hours.
I could see like chicken pot pie in a shake. I don't know about just straight chicken.
I think it was, the original was boiled chicken, water, and then maybe a handful of spinach, which is like the worst texture combination you could do.
Yeah, we'll work on that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, let's do that. Work on that and market it. So you were talking about working on technique. What do you feel like are some of the most common flaws in each of the 3 powerlifting lifts?
Oh boy. Yeah. And this is one of those things with the caveat of, if you look at the top lifters and the way that they move the bar and the technique that they have, it might be different than what you need to do. Same with their training. Like you wouldn't go in and you wouldn't try to mimic Usain Bolt's training and technique as a high schooler. Like he's at a different round. He's a different world. His goals are totally different, right? So I look at technique again for longevity standpoint, and then for efficiency, because that's the goal of powerlifting, is move the most weight. So we got to be the most efficient. Given that, I prefer a wider stance in the squat, wider shoulder width. I like vertical shins, vertical-ish. It doesn't have to be perfectly vertical. And I always tell people, if you do like 3 things right on the squat, if you push your hips back, push your knees out, and keep your head and chest upright, you're probably 90% of where you need to be with that. And there'll be little tweaks along the way, like foot positioning and this and that. And there's some individualized things from there. But, people leaning really far forward or really driving their knees forward, I mean, that to me is just not the most efficient. And there's a whole, you can delve into research and biomechanical rationale on that. But, again, I'm looking for what's the most amount of weight I can move within the rules. And that's the least, that decreases the distance. So,
yeah. And whenever you're talking about a squat, we're talking about like going low enough for it to count in a competition.
Yeah.
Which is barely past parallel, correct?
Yeah. So it is the by the rule book is if you look at the top of the thigh at the crease of the hip, not where the crease in your singlet goes down below your greater trochanter. It's the top of the thigh has to be below the top of the knee. You don't need to go deeper than that. And if you push your knees forward and you got a ton of forward knee travel, you got to go down a lot more. So just mechanically, physics, like it's more overall work that your body has to do. So I'm saying I'm looking for efficiencies there. And then I'm looking to train someone that way for years to build that to be their strongest point. Because, I mean, John Hack, his squats narrow stance, knees forward. The dude's been training for decades. So, and he's training that way. So, yeah, he's going to be strongest there because that's what he's adapted himself to.
Right. And this is going to be different than an Olympic weightlifter.
Oh, yeah.
Who needs to be able to squat as low as they can in order to catch that bar as deep into their squat as they can.
Yeah. And that, but I will say that I want to be strong narrow stance. When I was strong wide stance, I was strong narrow stance. I wasn't as strong, but I was taking 500 reps narrow stance for high reps, 8 or 10 or something like that. That was not uncommon. But you got to be strong all around. You want to build yourself to be an overall good athlete and a good strength athlete. Bench press, everyone thinks of as like an upper body workout. One of my first things I do, I have someone go set up with a bench press, and I go and I push their leg. And if their leg flops back and forth, I'm like, you're missing the boat here. Like the bench press is a full body lift if you do it correctly. Like your upper back has to be super, super tight throughout the entire lift. If your back cramps, you are probably doing it right when you first start. It's not comfortable. But having everything locked in stabilizes your shoulders, and it kind of just decreases where things can go wrong. You should have leg drive into the floor. So I do a lot of teaching on just people generally being tight, and you're not laying on the bench. You are positioned on the bench, and everything is very purposeful with that. That's probably the biggest thing is overall general tightness. Like a lot of, where to pull your shoulder blades down into, how to engage your lats with it. And then just use your core, use your legs, use everything you have. Like I actually got, it took a while. I got trained to actually use momentum. I would time up a leg drive so that would pop the bar the first inch off my chest and then time that up with my arm extension. So when you're talking about competitively, you look for every little thing you can like that. Deadlift. I have the hardest time with the deadlifts. The squats always came so natural to me, and deadlifts were always just a fight. It took me a long time to realize, like, you use your back differently on the deadlift. You pull your shoulder blades way down, like you put them in the back of your pocket. For there, I got caught up too much in trying to be tight like this, and I should have been tight there. And a lot of people, I think, get nervous, especially if someone's hurt their back. When they think of deadlifts, they think of hurting their back. You can have a little bit of rounding in your back and your spine, but I look for is that someone doesn't have motion during the lift. They're not flexing more when they're during the lift. That if they've got that little bit of lumbar flexion, little bit of forward bend, and it doesn't move, they're probably okay. Other than that, not to get into the sumo versus conventional, but it's, be strong in both. Be strong in every way to deadlift. Vary that up and be aggressive. Like that to me is one of the more fun things about the deadlift. Is sometimes it is, especially at meets, third attempt, everyone's tired. It's their last lift of the day. Usually my coaching about that point is go pick it up. Do what you're supposed to do, get super, super tight, and just pick the bar up. Don't just try to lift it. I want you to try to throw that bar through the ceiling. So a lot of people, named Chuck Vogelpohl. He was a West Side lifter. He was a huge squatter. He was the lightest guy for a while. He was the lightest guy to squat over a grand in multiply. He was so fun to watch lift. You would get, the entire room would be on their feet, and I think I saw a chair fly through there at the Arnold one time. If you want to talk about controlled violence, that's what that guy was. And he would come out. I've never seen him so angry at a barbell, pushing people out of the way, and just go up there and like he wanted to bite the thing in half.
What did the bar ever do to him?
It tried to push him down, and he pushed him back up, But that like just being able to, that mentality of like control yourself. Some people get like really loud and stuff in the warm up room. I never did. But someone actually came up to one of me and goes, "Man, you get really upset at that bar." I was like, "Yeah, I do. I really do. Like it's in my way." But being able to tap into that when you need to, and that takes some time to figure out how to do it. But like being able to apply that to a deadlift or a bench or a squat is kind of it can be something that takes time and takes a lot of focus. But when you hit it, it's there. And I said, you're not just trying to pick a bar. You're not just trying to move when you're in competition. Like I always tried to do everything the best I possibly could. There was one meet, I had the heaviest squat opener. And like it was one of the best moments. It was like a mid 700-pound squat or something. And so it's not near my best squat, but it's one of the best moments I remember, because when I came up, I heard people in the crowd gasp. I was like, "Oh, that was cool. Let's have Wade and do it again," because I moved it fast, because I was aggressive with it. So I guess another thing for someone getting into powerlifting, your job as a powerlifter is very, very simple. It's the exact same thing on each lift. The weight should not intimidate you. If anything, the weight should excite you. But it does not matter what the weight is on the bar. You're trying your hardest to make that bar do the exact same thing every time. So don't overcomplicate it. Go back to your foundations. Do what you're supposed to do, right? And don't get psyched out, because this is a barbell.
Yeah,
just not going to do anything unexpected.
Yeah, just like you said earlier, even at lighter weights, trying to move it as fast as possible.
Yeah.
So that you're approaching every single lift the same, no matter what the weight is.
Yeah, and that's where it's like you want to take it back to like the science aspect of it, like force equals mass times acceleration. If I got a light weight, I put a lot of acceleration into it, I'm producing high levels of force, and that is your job as a powerlifter, is produce the most force you possibly can. So that's why it's like approach every bar like it's heavy. Lift light weights like they're heavy. That's kind of the key to all that.
Awesome. Speaking of research, what are you doing or working on currently?
So I'm in dissertation mode right now. So I'm proposing my dissertation at the end of the month. It's going to be on, I'm taking kind of a twist, trying to really make a dent in kind of like the therapy world with low back pain. So, there's these small groups of muscles in your lumbar spine called the multifidus that, the thought is that they really help to control the one vertebrae to the next. And we've seen a lot of research that says that people with chronic low back pain, that muscle atrophies, you have fat infiltration, it just degenerates chronically over time. And the recommendations are for people to do resistance exercises to strengthen those muscles. And it's like, well, cool. That seems like it makes a lot of sense. That's what you do for knee, for shoulder, anything. You'd find the muscle that, is atrophied, and you help it. You train it. But no one's really gone beyond that as to say, like, how do you train that muscle? And it's not intuitive, because the deep multifidus, they only cross one vertebrae. So how do you possibly like get that muscle to be active? Because if you overload the spine too much with like an extension, so if you do a really heavy back extension, your erectors might take over and that muscle might drop down. We don't really know. So my next big study I'm proposing is I'm going to look at muscle activity of the deep and superficial multifidus fibers during common rehab exercises. So like the bird dog, like a back extension, and then compare that to, I'm pulling in the reverse hyperextension. I've done some research with that, and we're going to weight it and unweighted and kind of see just kind of like rank order these things, like which exercise with or without weight is does the stimulates that muscle the best, which one activates it the most. And then I'm going to compare that all back to walking, because there's a ton of research out there showing that walking is one of the best things to do for the lumbar multifidus and for low back pain in general. So it's kind of the idea, like, if you have people do a bunch of bird dogs, and that's one of McGill's big 3 exercises, and it activates that muscle, that's fine. Can that strengthen the muscle, or is that any better than going for a 10-minute walk? Like, what are the activation levels? And no one's really done that to look at different exercises to kind of rank them as what's best with indwelling EMGs. So there's some people, they use this like stickers, EMG stickers that go right on top of the muscle on the skin. This muscle is 2 inches thick. Like the deep fibers, you're not picking that up. And like the research says, is we can't read that with a surface electrode. So I'm actually using a needle to go in and put a wire in on those muscles. And the needle comes out, the wire stays in the person while they do all these exercises, and then we get a more accurate reading on those muscles. So simple idea. It's just, I was looking around, I was like, no one's done this yet. And, it's kind of like right up my alley. Like, well, let's just play, let's find some exercises that work this muscle. And it's cool because of all the stuff that's been done, like, we don't really know how those muscles work, especially in exercises. And that kind of blows my mind at this point. But
cool. I'm looking forward to the results.
I'll be looking for subjects. So
all right, let me know. As much as I love indwelling needles, you put it in my deep multifidus.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah,
there's not a lot of sensory nerves back there.
It'll be fine.
Not too bad.
Awesome. Where can people go to learn more about you? Does your garage gym have a site, or if someone wants to get onto your powerlifting team, like how would they go about doing all that stuff?
Yeah, well, probably the easiest way to do that is we don't really have a site, because again, I'm not trying to run a business with that. That is, that's the thing that me and my buddies put together, and we definitely take people in and kind of pull you in and train them. That's one thing we'd love to do. Probably you go to my UNE profile, find my email there. That's an easy way to find me there. My research is all up on PubMed. You can Google it there. Some of it's listed on my UNE profile there. And I've also recently started working for Finish Strong Physical Therapy, doing some lifting analysis and programming through them. So just trying to, get a little different than the powerlifting all the time, programming for different individuals. I think it's fun. It's a little bit different.
Well, Mike, I appreciate you coming on. Wealth of information. I'm sure our listeners are going to get a lot out of it.
All right. Thanks for having me.